This is a car that elicits some very strong reactions. It's a Maserati, and while some aspects of it feel very Italian and luxurious, there's so much about it that's just flat out cheap. This door paneling right here is just one example of it, this cheap wood grain looking thing. These buttons on the dash don't do it justice either. The reason this thing never worked is not just because of the cheapness, but add to that the unreliability of it, and this just became a flop. This is a 2015 Maserati Ghibli, and while the name Maserati is so exotic and so classy, the name Ghibli, I mean, come on. Assuming you can get over the fact that this thing is called a Ghibli, which I don't think I ever will, how can you not love this front end? This logo and the Maserati symbol is to die for. This is the kind of front end that makes people think you're driving some uber fancy, luxurious exotic, even though this has got some bargain basement parts in it. The fact that this is a Maserati and it's got the Maserati logo slapped everywhere on the car, it makes you feel like this is some sort of unattainable dream car, but the interior just ruins everything. But before I kill your dreams with what's on the inside of this Maserati, let me spend some time talking about the exterior, because on the outside they managed not to mess it up. Besides this very attractive front end of the car, as you go towards the rear, I love how it flares out, and I like the side profile and overall stance of the car. This is such a beautiful car to look at, which is why I'm doing everything I can to not step inside. At least Maserati decided to have real exhaust tips. Thank God. Should I open the door? I don't know. I just can't. Not right now. At least this Ferrari-derived 3-liter twin-turbo V6 gives you something to smile about. 345 horsepower, 369 pound-feet of torque, and it's got a nice sound to it. All right, I couldn't delay it much longer. Inside the car, most things are cheap, but not everything. Some things are actually decent, like the seats. It's an 8-year-old car, and the seats are still holding up pretty well, still supportive, still strong. The dash is still intact, nothing really rattling or loose. Underneath this cheap wood paneling are cup holders that are pretty small, and also a little compartment that's kind of useless, can't really fit much in there. And the framing of the center infotainment is covered with this cheap plastic. And then this wiper stock's the same way. Not everything's so cheap though. For example, these paddle shifters are pretty solid, and so are the door handles. And also these gauges are nice looking. They have an interesting shape to them. You have the Maserati logo in the middle with the nice dial. It's like part of the Maserati shows a lot of promise, but then the need to sell much more of these things caused them to cut all these corners and fill up this whole car with cheap plastic parts. I know this is an 8-year-old car, but some of these buttons feel extraordinarily cheap, including this gear shift lever, which just the movement and everything and the feel, it doesn't feel right. I don't know what's going on with this dash clock. It is entirely too small. What's funny about this car is for every cheap thing you find inside, there's some kind of counterpoint where this door handle is actually really solid. I would expect this to start rattling and becoming loose, but it's holding on pretty tight. So thumbs up to Maserati for that one. It's almost like Maserati couldn't make up their minds. Should we make this thing cheap or should we make it expensive? They had an expensive team and a cheap team and just told them to go at it. The infotainment is pretty outdated. Not that I have a problem with that because it's a 2015 model, but even from 2015, you shouldn't have a phone icon that looks like it belongs in the 90s. You have dual zone climate control in here, pretty standard. Heated seats, driver, passenger. You've got navigation. Interestingly, you have a really long slot for the SD card, even though the card itself is pretty small. Looking at the size of this car, you wouldn't think that this would be such a snug fit back here, but it's pretty tight and you only have room for 2 people. There's really no room for a third person to sit in the middle. So it's definitely snug back here, more than what you might think. Maserati definitely doesn't let you forget what car you're in. These logos are everywhere. That's not a bad thing though, because they look great. You have some cup holders in the center console, but they're just as useless as the ones up front. Super tiny. And you have a little bit of a storage space to store some CDs to use in your CD player up front. The real test of the cheapness of a car is how it sounds when you close the door. That definitely is not the sound of a high-end luxury vehicle. There's something very strange about this Maserati. When you get in it and you're looking to start the car, you have no idea where the start button is. Typically, the start button would be somewhere over here. Easy to spot. Nope. Tucked away behind the left paddle shifter, there you go, there's your start button. Even though the back seat space is tight, the trunk space is pretty decent, similar to what you'd get in a 5 Series. Driving this Maserati Ghibli, the comparisons you naturally make are to a comparable BMW 5 Series or a Mercedes E-Class from similar years like 2015, 2016. And although driving this car isn't so bad, it's actually pretty good in some ways. The handling's good. The ride quality is okay. It's a little bit on the firm side. And the wind noise, insulation, all of those things are fine. But I just feel like a BMW 5 Series or E-Class would just be better cars to own and drive. Even if you completely forget about the interior problems of the Maserati, at least the BMW is a better driver's car. And maybe if I was driving a Maserati with more power, I might think differently. But having 345 horsepower, 369 pound-feet of torque, on a car of this size with this weight, it's not enough. It's not quite that quick. And even though there's a good exhaust note and you have that engine noise going on, and I like being able to shift through the paddles, it's just not quite at the same level, and you feel it when you're driving this thing. I think in general, a sharper steering feel, more responsive throttle, all those things would have added to the experience, but unfortunately it's not quite all there. The one thing that's nice about this car though are the brakes. They're super grippy, they stop really, really quick. And if there's anything that gives you the sensation that this is a sports car, it's its braking prowess. Because there's a growl in this car, it makes it more fun to drive. It's not an artificial sound that's piped in, it's all natural coming in from this Ferrari-derived engine. Good sound. Ultimately, this Maserati Ghibli just misses the mark on so many different aspects. Given that this car has Italian roots and has engineering inspired by Ferrari, you would have expected so much more from this car. And that's why it's a dream killer, because this car could be so much more than what it is. And sadly for you and me, this car never really did sell quite that well, and it's some weird mix between a cheap econo box and an Italian exotic. And so 2024 will be the last year that this car is made. It was good to know this Maserati, so for now, bye Maserati Ghibli.